The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
Hell yeah, let's get Stinko.
This is the Giles and the Goalie podcast as part of the Zone Coverage Podcast Network. With your hosts, Giles Farrell and Ben Remington.
Welcome to the Giles and the Goalie podcast. I am your host, Giles Farrell. That over there is Ben Remington.
Hello.
We are back on the internet machine, the Zoom machine. We're bringing you a special podcast, as we alluded to a few weeks ago with head coach Bruce Boudreau. We are going to try and do a special show, bring on guests once a week during the outage or self-isolation, whatever you call it, just to add a little bit more entertainment value to our podcast. Although, if I must say, if you haven't listened to our last show with the Around the Horn type show that we did, that is highly entertaining, and I highly encourage you to check that out on whatever podcast app you listen to, or watch it on YouTube for the full effect, because some of the guests, when they were eliminated from the competition, did some funny things, in my opinion, off into the screen. So you should give that a look. But today, we are going to be joined by Dane Mizutani, who covers the Wild for the St. Paul Pioneer Press. Dane was kind enough to give us a little bit of time to chat about Kirill Kaprizov, Bill Guerin, Paul Fenton, and then we had a few other things, and then we finished off with a little last dance question for him. So that I had completely spaced on that, so I'm glad that you remembered to ask that. But it should be a good time.
Yeah, well, it's good.
So we will throw it to Dane, and then we will be back after. All right. Joining us on the Giles and the Goalie hotline. We should probably rename the hotline now that I think about it. Joining us on the hotline once again from the St. Paul Pioneer Press is Dane Mizutani. Dane, how's it going?
Pretty good. How you guys doing?
We're surviving like everyone else. How is quarantine life treating you?
I feel like it was really hard at first, and now I've just fallen into a groove where it seems like weeks just fly by. Like April went by in like a blink, and like the last 2 weeks of March went by. It felt like a year. So I don't know. It's not too bad. Still working. That's nice, because I know a lot of people aren't. So all things considered, I guess we're doing as well as we can.
Is there maybe been a thing that you've like done over this time that you maybe otherwise would not have had the time for?
Well, I finished Breaking Bad, so that was a thing. But also, like, kind of more serious. Like, I just have like reconnected with a lot of people that I just didn't really talk to, like friends from high school. Like, would talk to them individually, maybe once every couple of weeks. But now, like, the friend group kind of gets together, does a Zoom every week. I feel like a lot of people are doing that, just like reconnecting. Probably a little bit out of boredom, but also a little bit out of like, we don't get to see anybody, so like that human connection, interaction. So I don't know, it's been good in that sense too. Just getting to see a lot more people and talk to a lot more people that maybe I wouldn't have in normal circumstances.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think I talk to my friends now more than I ever did before, and that says something, because I usually make it a pretty good habit to see them, but now that we're kind of all in this, I probably do at least one video chat with most of them a week, so we do what we can. So first, hockey-related question we have for you is, Have you heard of a guy named Kirill Kaprizov?
No, never heard of him. Who is that? Yeah, no. Certainly
is,
have heard of him. I think everyone in the Twin Cities has heard of him and can't get enough of him. And man, he's coming to save the world, huh?
You know, it's funny. You might actually appreciate this more than anyone else. Somebody tweeted at me and a few others today. They compared him to Luka Doncic of the Dallas Mavericks, and I found that extremely fascinating because I love him. I love Luka.
Yeah, and I guess if the Wild could, in a perfect world for the Wild, he would be right, like this international guy who has lit up the other best league in the world. That is, for Luka, it was overseas, the NBA. For Kirill, it's the KHL and the NHL. Like, maybe, but man, that's a lot of pressure to put on this kid. No one thought Luka was going to be this good, and he was. But if Kirill Kaprizov is not Luka Doncic, that does not mean it was a failure, and they should write off it. Like, it might take some time, and I think that's what Wild fans need to kind of come to grips with when he does in fact sign.
I don't know if there's ever been a more hyped 5th round pick in the history of the world.
No, I would certainly not. Granlund, you could almost understand the hype because he was a first rounder. Kaprizov, you certainly can because of what he can do with the puck. He's a wizard and looks like the sniper. But like, you're right. Like, this guy was a 5th round pick, and has knocked everyone's socks off since being drafted. So man, I just kind of feel for the kid because he's going to come here and, whether he likes it or not, is going to be expected to put up 30, 40 goals right away. And if he doesn't, people are going to get really impatient.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the things I like to try to remind people is there's probably going to be a little bit of an adjustment period, whether that's, a month or a half a season. There's going to be some ebbs and flows to his first season, but at the end, there's a hope that he'll have that figured out for year 2.
For sure. And, maybe it takes right away, and maybe he's instantly a goal scorer. But I think you're right. I think the more likely scenario is that it's going to take some time. It's just like guys making the jump from the AHL to the NHL. Like, very few guys can just go straight to the league without having a little bit of seasoning in the minors. Kaprizov's obviously going to try. They're not going to sign him and throw him in Iowa. But it's going to take. I think it'll take some time, and I think you're right. Like, they need to be ready for the ebbs and flows that's going to come with this super, super talented kid.
Yeah, and could even argue that, say, the NHL comes back this summer and they allow players who sign new contracts to play in the remainder of the season. That could be part of maybe getting his game ironed out a little bit more quicker. So there would be both sides would be in agreement on burning that first year of his entry-level contract just to get that progression going.
Yeah, that'd be another just interesting thing is, you never want to burn the year of the contract, especially if the Wild, if they restart the season and they don't make the playoffs, it's like 7-8 games. Like, yeah, that would stink. But at the same time, like, you want him to progress along. If you lose a little bit of, a year in the front end, if he turns into the player you want to be 3, 4, 5 years down the road, you're going to give him long-term contract, big money anyway. So if you have to pay him a year sooner, but he's the sniper you want to be because of that year, I think it's probably worth it.
To switch gears a little bit, you brought up the kind of the playoff possibility of the league jumping right into the playoffs. But has there been maybe a scenario that you've heard of that's kind of piqued your interest in terms of the playoffs, or you're just kind of for whatever they come up with as long as it means we can go back to having live sports?
Yeah, I think it would be really cool if they were able to just eventually restart the regular season, let everyone finish it out. And it certainly would really stink for the Wild if they are just 1 point out or a few percentage points out of the playoffs. But if the NHL decides to go that way and just start the playoffs right away, As much as Craig Leopoldo hated and Matt Mako will hate it and every Wild player will hate it, I think for the sake of the league, if you can get the playoffs in, crown a champion, that's probably good. So certainly, like, as someone who covers them and as someone who, they were playing really well and they were, I'm not going to overstate it and call them one of the most exciting teams in hockey, but they were interesting at that time when the season kind of shut down. It would be cool to see them, get a chance, get a shot, whether that's the 4 cities that they talk about and maybe all the games are, a good chunk of games are played right here in St. Paul, or, there's been those scenarios where it would be kind of 4 locations scattered about the country or the continent. And you just play all the games there, or play, 1/4 of the games there, 1/4 of the games somewhere else, all the way to your hole. But that would be cool to get a lot of people in this area and different teams cycling in and out. But honestly, like, whatever scenario creates a season or allows them to continue is one I'm in favor of, whether that's, here, Grand Forks, Disney World, Vegas, I think we all just want to see something that we can't predict. And that's why we miss this so much.
Yeah, I saw the NBA, I think it was yesterday, possibly could be using Disney World as a site, and I thought, man, that would be a sweet gig to just have to hang out in Disney World for a little bit while playing basketball.
Yeah, yeah. The NBA is looking at Disney World in Vegas. That's pretty cool. The NHL is looking at Grand Forks. So.
That's the. What to say, that's the dream, and then you said the NHL's looking at Grand Forks. Yeah, you mentioned the Wild were, they were interesting. Like, go figure, the Wild finally have maybe a little bit more of a fun-paced team that kind of excites the fan base, which had gotten obviously angry more or less over the last couple of years. But did you? Because we just did a series on this, did you have a player in mind who you maybe thought throughout the entire season was the most valuable to the Wild this year in terms of production?
I know he came on late, but I think you got to say Fiala, because even if he was getting healthy scratched in October and, pissing former coach Bruce Boudreau off, like, when he needed to show up and when they needed to go on a run, he was one of the best players in the league. So, I mean, I understand, the entire season as an entity as a whole, contributing into who's the most valuable player. But when push came to shove and the Wild needed points, needed goals, needed a victory, Fiala was putting the team on his back, and he didn't look like he was slowing down. I think you have to consider him the MVP. Maybe Stalock, if it wasn't Fiala, just because of, this career backup came in and gave them just very, very solid goaltending. Solid goaltending, maybe not very, very, but solid goaltending with everything that went on with Evan Dubnyk. And I don't think that's something the Wild expected. I don't think it's a situation Alex Stalock expected to be in. So I think you could make kind of a niche argument for him too, as someone who kind of kept them afloat when Fiala wasn't firing. But just looking at the way the season played out, the way it ended, and if they come back, the Wild won't make the playoffs if Fiala doesn't continue to play the way he does.
Yeah, that was. I took the harder approach when I did my piece, and I argued Stalock, and it's kind of made me kind of rethink a little bit how maybe the season play out, because Dubnyk went out mid-November and the Wild had won 7 out of 20 games at that point, and if Stalock didn't kind of stabilize the goal like he did, the season could have went very, very differently. Bruce Boudreau could have been let go in December as opposed to February, and maybe that would have prompted more transactions from Bill Guerin. Like, who knows? It could have been a completely different thing, and we certainly wouldn't be sitting here talking about the possibility of the Wild resuming the season with the eye set on the playoffs.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. Like without Stalock, who knows if Kevin Fiala's surge matters. So I think both of those guys are worthy.
I got to be honest, I never thought I would write that this year. Just saying. So yeah, it's just been just a fascinating last 12 games under Dean Evison after Bruce Boudreau was let go. What do you think happens with Evison behind the bench? Does he maybe get a look past the season if they resume, or is their sight set on a bigger fish out there for head coach?
I would think if Dean doesn't get anything more than the 12 games that he got, it's going to be really hard for Bill to not just want to go with a splashier hire or someone that he's more familiar with. Dean's not his guy. The guys, the players like playing for Dean, and the Wild as a whole looked at least more fast-paced, a little more entertaining, a little more dangerous in both zones under Dean Evison. But at the end of the day, it's 12 games. So you feel for a guy like that who's been grinding away for this opportunity, gets it, has the team playing as well as it has all season, maybe making a playoff run. Say the Wild make the playoffs. COVID-19 never happens. Wild make the playoffs and they win the first round, and then they get knocked out like they always do in the second round. Then Bill Guerin almost that forces his hand. He has to hire Dean Evison. Now it's well, thanks Dean. It was 12 games. I'm going to go with my guy, or I'm going to go with a guy who has a little more name recognition, or a guy who, I think you see it all the time across sports. GMs come in and they want to hire their guy, and as good as Dean has been, and as much as the players take to him, at the end of the day, he'll never be Bill's guy. So it sucks for him because, unless the season starts up again and, then obviously things look different. But if this is all he gets, I don't see a scenario where it makes sense, or it could happen for him to be named, to shed that interim label.
Yeah. It's,
Evison,
go ahead.
So Evison, it's kind of a weird situation because he was very much Fenton's guy. Did you get to spend a lot of time with Fenton? I know you bounced around with Vikings coverage and such during that time. Were you around much for the Fenton era?
Towards the end, I think I hopped back on in December or something. So I got probably half the Fenton era. I got the early stages of it, and then the later stages of it, and then the abrupt ending. So,
yeah,
I guess yes and no. Probably not the whole time, but I got to experience what he was like and what the environment was like around his tenure.
Yeah, that's what I'm curious about, because when he was hired here, and even if you weren't around, I'm sure you were at least aware or read or were around a little bit, where he was kind of touted as very much a guy who had earned the opportunity, and very much a guy that was knew his stuff and was fiery, but people seemed to like him. What was there a point, or was there any instance where you saw or heard something where that was starting to unravel? Obviously, a lot of stuff happened behind the scenes, but just being in the building, did you ever get a feeling on that, or was it as a surprise to you as much as it was to everybody else?
The way in which it ended so abruptly was a surprise. I knew that there was, just by talking to people and virtue of just being around the team and seeing those things, you knew there was a tension there, and he had isolated himself over the course of that 11 months or however long he was in town, 15 months. But no, I didn't think they were going to fire him in July, especially when you get through an entire off season and then you just assume that, the NHL probably more than any other sport is draft, development camp, free agency. By July 4th, you can almost hang it up until training camp. So it was shocking at that time. In hindsight, it makes sense. I get that, Craig always talks about this culture and, this family, and it can sound really cliche sometimes. But I think the fact that there were a lot of people within the organization that weren't big fans of Paul Fenton eventually word gets around, and I think that mattered to Craig. I don't think it had to do with one thing. I don't think it was one move. I don't think it was signing one guy or not signing one guy, or trading the core. Like, I think it was just a, kind of death by a thousand cuts kind of thing, like things that built up over time. But I think the relationships that he did or he made or he frayed over the course of his time really, I think that was kind of the nail in the coffin for Paul.
To move on a little bit, Mikko Koivu, we talked about him on our last show, and he had a Zoom call with the media, I think a week ago or a couple weeks ago. Honestly, weeks blend together at this point.
Right.
What are your thoughts on him, playing another season beyond the what's left of the 2019-20 season? Is that something he's maybe leaning on retirement, or is he kind of playing it close to the vest like he so patently does?
Yeah, it's y'all know him, and I think everyone, if you know anything about Mikko Koivu, it's that like he's not going to tip his hand. But there were some things in that Zoom call that he did say that were interesting. Like, I don't think if Mikko Koivu is playing in the NHL next season, it's because somehow he convinced Bill Guerin to give him like a 1-year contract, and he took like low money to be the fourth line center. He's not playing anywhere else. I don't think he wants to. I think he has, the pride of just being a Minnesota guy for his whole career, wearing that one sweater. Not a lot of guys get to do that. And I think he also understands that his game has taken a downturn. He's not a top 6 center anymore, and he knows that. That being said, I don't know if he's done playing. Like, he might be done playing in the NHL, but he entertained the thought of maybe going back to Finland. Maybe he retires from the NHL and finishes his career with a Finnish team, plays a couple of years, and maybe transitions to management. I think when he retires from the NHL, that might not necessarily mean he's retiring from playing hockey. But where I lean on this is, like, I think if the season is done, if we don't get, a resolution and they just say, the 1920 season is over, I think Mikko Koivu's done playing for the Wild. I think that we unceremoniously saw his career end without even knowing it. But I get the sense that he wants to continue playing just back at home.
Yeah. And should he, retire, would it be the center position you would say is probably the Bill Guerin's biggest need to address in the off season whenever that happens, or would it be goaltending? If you have to pick one.
Oh man, better pick right? I guess that's the harder on Bill. I go center because I think you can convince yourself maybe that Capo showed enough, and he played like 5 games and he looked okay for 3 of them, and then he looked bad for 2 of them or whatever. Like, you could convince yourself that at the very least he could be a competent goalie if you want to cut ties with Devin Dubnyk after this season or try and get rid of him and roll with Kakkonen. Like, I think that there is, I don't know if that's the best option, but then you look at what the centers that the Wild have, and the Wild have had on their roster for the last decade. Like, when's the last time they had like a legitimate big boy center that can go like take over a game? Like, Eric Stahl has been great for them for the last 5 years. But he was signed, and that was kind of like, everyone thought he was in the downturn of his career and had a revitalization in the Twin Cities. But other than that, like, you haven't really seen it very often. That's why I think it'll be a priority. I think that's got to be his main priority is finding a centerman to pair with Kaprizov, like we talked about, and Fiala, like we talked about. Like, there's talented wingers on this team now, kind of up and down the lineup. There are players that at least the timeline translates to the future. I think you got to find a center that falls in line with that timeline. I don't think Luke Kunin's it. I think he's a good player. I don't think he's your number 1 center. I don't know if he's your number 2 center. Same with Eriksson Ek. Like, those guys are good, but you got to go find a bona fide number one center. And I think that'll be his main priority. However he gets that, I'm not sure. It's probably got to be a trade. We'll see. I think that probably means you lose one of your defensemen if that's his main priority. But that would be my main priority if I was Bill Guerin, is I got to go find someone to pair with these talented wingers that I think are really, really good.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And I don't know. I just have this kind of weird feeling that, you get something much better out of Dubnyk next year in the last year of his contract. I just feel like there's maybe something for him to prove a little bit there, but that's just me. He could be bought out in the off season, but who knows?
Yeah.
Ben, did you have any other questions?
Just one. I know we hadn't really planned on this, but Dane, I know you're also a big hoops guy. How much have you enjoyed The Last Dance?
Oh, so much. Like I don't know. Like I was born in '92, so I'm like 28, and like I know Jordan just like being like a fan of the game, studying and like him and like reading about him, but I'm learning so much from this documentary. And like I don't know, I flip it on Sunday night and I just like it's like hypnotizing. Like I get lost in it and the 2 hours are gone.
Yeah.
And these like untold stories that you've heard like murmurs about, but like the Rodman Vegas story is like crazy, and like all these little anecdotes that you're getting and that you're learning, all the while learning more about like this dynasty that I never really got to fully appreciate. So I was like, 6 years old when he hit the shot over Russell. Like it's been awesome. It's been cool. Besides the NFL draft, it's like been the one thing I look forward to, like sports. So it's been nice to have a sport something. It's not a sporting event, but it's something sports related to look forward to every Sunday. It's been awesome.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very rare thing to sit, like you check into Twitter during The Last Dance and you see literally everyone is talking about Last Dance. It's kind of been the rallying point for everyone during this pandemic. But yeah, I hope we get a documentary that follows this up later with the 48 hours of Rodman in Vegas.
Oh my God.
The 90 hours.
I'm fascinated by that too, and I'm surprised there was as much footage of Rodman in Vegas. Like, who the hell is recording that, and why is he allowing that? But I also didn't take Rodman for a singing songs before he takes a shot kind of guy. I did not see that coming. I really didn't, I gotta say.
Yeah, that whole scene was hilarious. I saw funny, like tons of memes and things on Twitter just about it. It's like, Jordan, I've been carrying the team on my back for a decade. Scotty, I'm underpaid. Rodman, so y'all gonna let me go to Vegas or not? Like, it's just like, that was so, like the dynamics of that team were so polarizing. And I wish like we had Twitter back then. I wish I was, my age now, getting to consume that team and that dynasty as it was. Would have been cool. But it's been cool how that Last Dance has also like transcended, like it's not just sports fans. Like my mom, like I grew up in Illinois in the suburbs of Chicago, and like she remembers the Jordan dynasty, and she's not a sports fan, but she's like, are you watching The Last Dance? It's been awesome. Like that team was so fun, and like I don't know how much you know about them. And I was like, well, they were good. So like it's just been fun to see like how many different people have gravitated to that. I guess we can call it a sports documentary, but it's really more than that. So
yeah, it's almost into its own category at this point, and we're not even halfway done with it. Like it can just be categorized as The Last Dance. It doesn't need documentary or filmmaking or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all we have. Dane, thank you so much for taking a little bit of time to join us, and obviously stay safe, stay healthy, and hopefully we'll be seeing your wild stories from actual wild games hopefully in the near future.
Yeah, I hope so too. Well, thanks for having me on, guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, have a good one.
So thank you again to Dane for joining us. Always fun to chat with him, and obviously we could have gone more into basketball, I feel like. But I didn't want to scare away our listeners too much because hockey fans have this weird thing with basketball. So
Yeah, it's really too bad because like he said, like we talked about, The Last Dance has been really transcendent. I mean, I haven't seen anything like this on Twitter consistently. Like it happens for the Super Bowl, whatever. It happens for
with the NFL draft.
Yeah, like it'll happen for that kind of stuff. But like this is like this is above and beyond even like Game of Thrones on Twitter. Like it's anybody who covers any kind of sport is watching The Last Dance on Sunday nights and tweeting about it, and it's been really cool. Like we talked about, it's been a lot of fun, and unfortunately for Dane, he doesn't really remember that time. I'm a little bit older, so I barely remember the very end of the Jordan dynasty. So it's been really fun for me to catch up on a lot of details as I was just like really kind of becoming a very young sports fan at the time where Jordan was wrapping up. So it's been just awesome to watch this so far.
Yeah, I'd say obviously I remember more of the 98 Bulls than really anything else before that.
Right.
Michael Jordan's last shot with the Bulls is one of my oldest sports memories. Like I remember sitting in front of the TV watching that.
Oh, wow.
And
cool.
It's, obviously I'm sure it's a treasured memory for a lot of people, but having that as one of my earliest sports memories is pretty cool. And I just thought of these guys as just like these, bigger than life guys. And I'm just so floored by all this stuff that has gone on behind the scenes during this season. So yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is I want to spend 48 hours in Vegas with Dennis Rodman.
I mean, spending 48 hours in Vegas with you was probably my maximum. I'm not
I've done it twice.
I know, and I barely survived both times, so I don't know that I could handle 48 hours. I mean, it was more than that for both of us. It was more than that for you and I.
It's probably the equivalent that Dennis spent in Vegas.
I was going to say it was more than 48 hours for Rodman too, obviously. So, yeah, I don't know that I could do it. Like, good God, my liver can only take so much. It's not nearly as seasoned as some folks. So.
Oh, come on, man, build up the tolerance. We're inside all the time.
I've got plenty of tolerance. The will is the problem. I don't have the will.
Mm. And I suppose you do have a baby to look after. It's not.
Well, I mean, that's very secondary. So.
It's. Good thing our wives don't listen to this podcast.
Yeah, thank God.
And the times they do, they ask us about prostate exams.
They don't even listen to that. They're just on the show and then they never listen again.
Yeah. All right, we're going to a weird place, so that's probably time for us to shut it down.
Yes.
You can follow Ben and I on Twitter at Ben Remington, at Giles Farrell Podcast, Twitter at GATG Wild Podcast. Check out zonecoverage.com/wild, where myself, Joe Booley, and Tony Abbott are getting content out daily, Monday through Friday. That includes the pause that we're in. So please bookmark that page if you are a big Wild fan, because we are going to put in a lot of work bringing you content. So give that a look. This week we did a series on Wild MVP. Each of us brought a different player to the table. We made our argument, and hopefully you go ahead and read that, because we all made some pretty compelling arguments, if I must say. So, subscribe to this podcast on whatever you listen to. Shout out to the person. I got an email from Podbean. Somebody listening on there commented on our show. So I shout out to whomever that is. It didn't say who commented, but there was a comment from our last show. So,
okay.
And it was
positive, actually.
It was just good discussion in that. So it was nice. So shout out to whomever that was. And if you do listen on iTunes, please drop us a rating. We love the ratings. Helps us boost up in the iTunes algorithm wherever we slot in. So, that will do it for us, and we will be back Monday with a new episode of the Giles and the Goalie podcast.
Woo! Later.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Gill and the Goaltender podcast.
That's not resiliency. You're making it sound like we're good. That's all. I'm done.